still remember the day I first met him. It was a sunny afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the world felt like it was smiling just for me. I was sitting at a small cafe, sipping my latte, lost in a book, when he walked in. There was something about him. Maybe it was the confident way he carried himself or the warm smile that immediately lit up the room. My heart, for reasons I couldn't explain, skipped a beat. He approached me with a gentle, almost hesitant smile. "Hi, do you mind if I sit here?" he asked. I barely noticed anyone else in the cafe that day. There was something magnetic about him, and I nodded before I even realized what I was saying. That moment, simple as it seemed, would change my life forever. We talked for hours that first day. We shared stories of our childhoods, our dreams, and our little quirks. I learned that he loved jazz music, collected vintage watches, and had a soft spot for stray animals. I told him about my love for reading, my obsession with cooking shows, and how I always laughed at the smallest things. It felt effortless, like we had known each other forever. Weeks turned into months, and our friendship grew into something neither of us expected, but both desperately wanted. Every date, every conversation, every late-night phone call felt like a new adventure. We were young, ambitious, and hopelessly in love. I remember telling my best friend, "I think he's the one." She laughed, warning me not to get ahead of myself, but deep down, I knew my heart had already made its choice. When he proposed, it was under the twinkling lights of a small park downtown. He got down on one knee, holding a simple yet elegant ring, and asked me to spend my life with him. Tears blurred my vision as I said yes, imagining the life we would build together. We dreamed big. We talked about traveling the world, buying our first home, and maybe even starting a family someday. Everything felt possible when we were together. Our wedding was small, intimate, and perfect. Surrounded by close friends and family, we exchanged vows that promised forever. I wore a simple ivory dress that made me feel like a princess, and he looked dashing in his classic black tuxedo. I still remember the look in his eyes as he whispered, "You're my everything." That moment, that simple phrase, made me believe that no matter what life threw at us, we could handle it together. The first few years of marriage were like a dream. We moved into a small apartment with creaky floors and leaky faucets, but it didn't matter. We laughed at the small mishaps and celebrated every little success. Our weekends were filled with spontaneous road trips, cooking experiments that often ended in disaster, but laughter, and quiet evenings curled up on the couch talking about everything and nothing. But beyond the laughter, there was a comfort, a sense of stability that I had never known before. I felt safe, cherished, and loved. Every morning I woke up to his warm smile, every night I went to sleep holding his hand, and every day I felt grateful for the life we were building together. I believed, without a doubt, that we were unbreakable. I also remember the little things that made him who he was. The way he would bring me coffee in bed on lazy Sundays, the way he would hum softly while cooking dinner, the way his eyes would light up when he talked about his dreams. Those small, seemingly insignificant details made me fall in love with him over and over again. Yet, even in this perfect beginning, I didn't know that life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. I didn't know that the man I loved with all my heart would one day become a stranger in the moments I needed him most. I didn't know that the dreams we wove together would be tested, stretched, and at times broken. But that's a story for later. For now, all I knew was the warmth of his hand in mine, the sound of his laughter echoing through our little apartment, and the certainty that I was in love with someone I believed would never let me go. Looking back now, I can see how fragile happiness can be, how quickly life can change. But in that moment, on that sunny day in Charlotte, I was blissfully unaware. I was a young woman in love, and my world was perfect. And though I couldn't have known it then, those precious early years were the calm before the storm, a storm that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and strength. And so, with a heart full of hope and eyes full of dreams, I embarked on a journey with him, believing that together we could face anything. Little did I know, that journey would soon test every ounce of my courage, resilience, and the very love I thought would last forever. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Just when I thought our little world was perfect, reality came knocking, and it came with a punch I wasn't prepared for. It started subtly. He came home later than usual one evening, exhausted, muttering about meetings and phone calls. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming work stress was temporary. But the late nights became frequent. The arguments about small things escalated, and I could feel a shift, a subtle withdrawal in the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, the way he no longer held me the same way he once did. Then came the day that would change everything. He lost his job. It wasn't just any job. It was the career he had built himself up in for years. He had worked tirelessly, often at the expense of sleep, and sometimes even at the expense of our relationship. And in one brutal, unannounced meeting, it was gone. I remember the look on his face when he came home that evening, defeated, hollow, broken. "I'm sorry," he whispered, almost ashamed to admit the news. I held him, trying to reassure him, but inside, fear gnawed at me. Losing a job is one thing, but watching the man you love crumble under the weight of his own failures is something else entirely. The bills didn't wait. The rent, the utilities, the car payment, they all piled up, mocking us with their relentless persistence. I took on extra shifts at work, often staying late just to cover what he could no longer manage. I smiled at clients, pretended everything was fine, while at home, I quietly cried into my pillow, wondering how life had shifted so drastically. He tried to find another job, but doors kept closing. Each rejection chipped away at his confidence, and slowly, I started to see the man I loved being replaced by someone I barely recognized. Nights that used to be filled with laughter became tense and silent. Even our conversations felt like walking on eggshells. One wrong word, one small criticism, and the tension would escalate. I tried everything. I encouraged him, reminded him of his strengths, reminded him that he was talented, capable, and loved. I told him, "We'll get through this, together." But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, it became painfully clear that he was drifting away, and not because of me, but because of his own insecurities and fears. There were moments, though, when he tried to mask the fear with anger. Arguments erupted over the smallest of things: a burnt dinner, a misplaced document, even the way I folded laundry. I realized, heartbreakingly, that this wasn't really about me. It was about his inability to face the storm, and my attempts to keep us afloat only seemed to push him further away. I remember one particularly cold evening. I came home from a double shift, exhausted, my legs aching, my mind tired from the constant juggling of responsibilities. He was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, not even acknowledging my presence. I gently placed my hand on his shoulder, and he flinched, as if my touch reminded him of his failures. "I can't do this anymore," he finally said, voice low, almost defeated. I felt my chest tighten, a sick feeling in my stomach. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, to fight for us. But instead, I took a deep breath. Because I knew that anger wouldn't help, tears wouldn't help, and pleading certainly wouldn't help. So I did what I could. I held him, whispered words of encouragement, and silently prayed that he would find his strength again. But that night, as I watched him retreat further into himself, I realized something that would haunt me for years to come. Love alone is not always enough to keep someone by your side. Weeks passed, and our home, once filled with warmth, felt cold and unwelcoming. The laughter was gone, replaced by silence and tension. I cooked meals for two, but he often refused to eat. I tried to talk, to reconnect, to reach him in any way I could, but he was no longer the man that I had fallen in love with. He was a stranger in our home, a shadow of the person I had vowed to spend my life with. And yet, despite everything, I held on. I refused to give up on the man that I loved, even if he had given up on himself. I believed that storms pass, that hearts can heal, and that perhaps somewhere beneath the fear and anger, he still loved me too. But life has a cruel way of testing the limits of your heart. Just as I thought we might find our footing again, the real test came. A moment that would define everything. A moment when I needed him more than ever, and he would leave me to face the darkness alone. I don't remember the exact day it happened. There was no warning, no foreshadowing, just one phone call, one emergency, one moment that tore the fragile thread of hope I had clung to. And in that instant, I realized that some struggles are bigger than love, that some failures cannot be fixed with words, and that sometimes the person you trust most can be the one who lets you down when you need them the most. That first struggle, that devastating blow, was the beginning of a long, painful journey. It was the first crack in the foundation of our marriage, the first time I truly questioned everything I thought I knew about him, about us, and about love itself. And little did I know, this struggle was only the beginning of a storm that would test every ounce of my courage, my patience, and my heart. After months of struggling together, a new and cruel challenge crept into our marriage. Not something external, but something far more dangerous. The slow, silent drift of emotional distance. I noticed it first in the small things, the little shifts that, at the time, I brushed off as temporary stress. It started with the way he looked at me. Once, his eyes were my safe place, a reflection of love, warmth, and reassurance. But now they seemed tired, distant, almost guarded. I would catch him staring at nothing in particular, lost in thoughts he refused to share. It was as if he had built an invisible wall between us, brick by brick, hiding from the very person he once promised to love forever. Conversations became strained. I would ask him about his day, about his feelings, about the little things that had once been the glue of our connection. He would reply in monosyllables, distracted, or with a sigh that made my chest ache. I tried not to take it personally, telling myself he was under pressure, that he was hurting in ways I couldn't understand. But deep down, a gnawing fear grew inside me. What if he was slipping away, not just emotionally, but entirely? Nights became the hardest. I would lie beside him, expecting the warmth, the familiar touch, the soft whispers of love. But he would turn away, restless, his arms no longer seeking mine. I tried to reach him, touch his hand, brush my fingers against his cheek, but he recoiled, almost instinctively. It was as though my presence reminded him of the failures he carried, the guilt that suffocated him silently. And I, the person he once called home, was now a stranger trying desperately to connect with someone I hardly recognized. The loneliness was crushing. I would sit in our living room, the soft hum of the TV filling the empty spaces where laughter used to reside, wondering how we ended up here. I remembered the days when we couldn't go 5 minutes without talking, when even our silences were comfortable, full of understanding. Now, silence was deafening. It was heavy, oppressive, and a constant reminder that the man I loved was no longer mine. Not really. I tried everything to break through. I planned little surprises, cooked his favorite meals, left notes with words of encouragement and love. I initiated conversations about our dreams, our future, our struggles. I wanted him to know I was still here, still willing to fight for us. But each attempt seemed to push him further into the shadow he had created for himself. It wasn't rejection, not exactly. It was avoidance, a quiet retreat from the love that once bound us so tightly. And then came the subtle signs that hurt more than words could ever convey. He would forget important dates, brush off plans we had made together, or respond to my concerns with irritation rather than empathy. I began to notice the little lies, not malicious, but careless, small omissions, half-truths, excuses that barely covered the truth of his withdrawal. It broke me in ways I didn't even know were possible. How could someone who once loved me so fiercely now treat me as if I were invisible? I remember one particularly painful night. I had spent the entire day trying to organize a small celebration for his birthday, wanting to rekindle a spark, to remind him of us. I baked a cake, decorated the living room, and even wrote a heartfelt letter expressing my love and gratitude. When he came home, he barely glanced at the effort, muttered a distracted thanks, and went straight to his laptop. I sat there, tears stinging my eyes, feeling like a ghost in my own home. That night, I realized with a sinking heart that the man I loved was no longer capable of seeing me. Not really. The emotional distance grew with each passing day. The bed we shared felt colder, the kitchen quieter, the walls of our home closing in with the weight of silence. I began to dread returning home, knowing that instead of comfort and love, I would find detachment and indifference. I found myself lying awake for hours, replaying every argument, every silence, every hurtful word, trying desperately to find a way back to him. But the harder I tried, the further he seemed to drift. I questioned myself endlessly. Was it something I did? Something I failed to do? Was I not enough? Not worthy of his attention? Not deserving of his love? The self-doubt was suffocating. I became obsessed with reading between the lines, analyzing every gesture, every tone of voice, searching for signs that the man I loved still cared. But signs were scarce. What remained was a hollow presence, a shadow of a relationship that once thrived on intimacy, trust, and shared dreams. Friends and family noticed the change. They offered advice, sympathy, and gentle warnings, but no one could truly understand the silent despair of loving someone who no longer meets you halfway. I felt trapped in the limbo, caught between love and heartbreak, hope and despair, memory and reality. Each day was a balancing act, pretending everything was okay, while my heart quietly cracked under the strain of neglect. I also began to see the subtle ways his life had changed, the things he no longer shared with me. Private calls, whispered conversations, secret habits, all invisible threads that widened the chasm between us. And yet, in the moments when our eyes met, I could still glimpse the man I had fallen in love with. That fleeting spark kept me tethered, hoping that one day, somehow, we could reclaim the connection that had been stolen from us. But hope can be cruel. It can sustain you, yes, but it can also blind you to reality. The emotional distance wasn't a phase, it was a warning that the foundation of our marriage, once solid and unwavering, was cracking beneath the weight of unspoken fears, unresolved struggles, and silent resentments. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I realized that love alone might not be enough, that the man who once promised me forever could become a stranger in the very moments I needed him most, that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who leave the deepest voids. Little did I know, the real test was yet to come, a crisis that would demand his presence, his support, and his love, and reveal the harsh truth that when faced with the storm, some people run, while others stay and fight. And I would soon discover which category he belonged to. Life has a way of revealing who people truly are, and it often does so in the most painful, unanticipated moments. I had grown accustomed to the subtle distance, the cold silences, and the emotional withdrawal. But nothing could have prepared me for the storm that was about to hit, a storm that would not only test my marriage, but my very soul. It began one ordinary evening. I was juggling my job, household responsibilities, and the endless demands of life. I had just returned from a long day at work, my body aching, my mind exhausted. I noticed a sharp pain in my side, but I brushed it off, thinking it was nothing serious. Later that night, the pain became unbearable, radiating through my body, leaving me gasping for air and terrified. I needed help, support, someone to lean on. I needed the man I had once called my rock. I reached for my phone and called him. I expected him to drop whatever he was doing, to rush to my side, to be there for me like he had promised, like he should have been. But instead, there was silence on the other end. He didn't answer. I left a message, my voice trembling, explaining the pain, pleading for him to come home. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I called again. Still nothing. Panic set in. I grabbed my keys and rushed to the emergency room, my body weak, my heart pounding. Not just from the pain, but from the realization that I was facing this alone. Alone. The word echoed in my mind like a cruel mantra. How could the person I trusted most, the person who swore to be my partner through thick and thin, abandon me at the moment I needed him most? Sitting in the sterile hospital waiting room, shivering under the harsh fluorescent lights, I felt a wave of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak crash over me. I watched couples walk by, holding hands, sharing reassuring touches, and my chest ached with the cruel irony that the man I loved, the man I had sacrificed so much for, was nowhere to be found. Hours passed. The doctors worked quickly, assessing me, running tests, and assuring me that everything would be okay. But the emotional pain, the betrayal, the abandonment was far worse than any physical discomfort I had ever felt. I wanted to scream, to cry, to curse the universe, but all I could do was sit there, trembling, tears streaking my face, and wait. When he finally called later that night, I answered with a mix of relief and fury. "Where were you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. His response was vague, excuses about work, stress, and responsibilities that had nothing to do with my emergency. I realized then, with a sinking heart, that he had made a choice to put everything else above me, above our life, above the very love we had built together. I felt a profound sense of betrayal. This wasn't just emotional distance anymore. This was abandonment. This was the moment where the foundation of our marriage cracked so deeply that it seemed impossible to repair. The man who once promised to protect me, to stand by me in sickness and in health, had failed in the moment that mattered most. That night, alone in the hospital room, I reflected on everything that had led us here: the financial struggles, the silent arguments, the growing emotional chasm. And I realized something painful. Love isn't just about shared dreams and happy memories. Love is about being there when it counts, about holding each other up when life gets unbearable. And he had chosen not to be there. I spent that night lying in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a mixture of rage and sorrow. How could someone I had loved so fiercely, someone I had supported through every hardship, be capable of walking away when I needed them the most? The answer was painful, but clear. Sometimes people show their true colors not in the bright, happy moments, but in the darkest, most vulnerable ones. After that night, things could never go back to how they were. The emotional distance turned into a chasm. Our conversations became even more strained. Every interaction was laced with unspoken resentment, pain, and disappointment. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to force him to see the hurt he had caused. But I also knew that anger alone would not mend the damage. I had to find my strength elsewhere, because waiting for him to change was a gamble I could no longer afford. That crisis marked the beginning of my transformation. It was the moment I realized that life doesn't always hand you the support you expect, even from the person you love most. It was the moment I understood that true strength comes not from being held up by someone else, but from finding the courage to stand on your own, even when the world seems to be crumbling around you. In the days that followed, I focused on recovery, not just physical, but emotional and mental. I spent hours reflecting on who I was, what I wanted, and how I could reclaim my life from the shadow of neglect and abandonment. I started small, taking walks, reconnecting with friends, journaling my thoughts, and reminding myself that my worth was not tied to his presence, his support, or his love. And yet, despite everything, a part of me still hoped. Hope that he would realize the gravity of his absence. Hope that he would come back remorseful and ready to fight for us. But deep down, I knew that hope could be dangerous. It could blind me to reality and keep me tethered to someone who had already let me down in the most critical moment of all. That night in the hospital, that moment of sheer vulnerability became a defining chapter in my life. It was the moment I learned that sometimes the people you trust most can fail you in ways you never imagined. It was the moment I understood that abandonment doesn't always come with a dramatic farewell. It can come silently, invisibly, in the form of absence when presence is needed most. And as I walked out of the hospital days later, stronger, determined, and painfully aware of the fragility of love, I knew one thing for certain. My journey was far from over. The crisis had left scars, yes, but it had also ignited a fire within me, a fire that would drive me to reclaim my life, to rebuild my strength, and to discover the unshakable resilience that would carry me through the darkest chapters ahead.
After the crisis, after the abandonment, after the gut-wrenching realization that the man I loved most could walk away when I needed him, I faced a choice that would define the rest of my life. I could either continue drowning in despair, waiting for him to realize what he had lost, or I could rise from the ashes and reclaim my life on my own terms. I chose to rise. It wasn't easy. Some mornings I woke up feeling hollow, haunted by the silence of our home and the memory of his absence. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, threatening to crush every ounce of hope I had left. But deep inside, a spark refused to die. I reminded myself, you survived the storm this far. You are stronger than you think. That thought became my mantra, echoing in the quiet moments when the world seemed cold and unfeeling. I began with small steps. I threw myself into my work with renewed determination, taking on new responsibilities, learning new skills, and finding ways to contribute that gave me a sense of purpose beyond the pain. Every paycheck, every small accomplishment reminded me that I could survive, thrive, and build something meaningful without depending on anyone else. But it wasn't just about work. It was about rediscovering who I was, beneath the layers of heartbreak, fear, and disappointment. I started journaling, pouring my rawest thoughts onto paper, untangling the chaos of emotions that had built up over months of neglect and distance. I confronted my anger, my sorrow, and my frustration. And in doing so, I began to understand that my strength didn't come from anyone else. It came from within me. I also sought support, connecting with friends and loved ones who reminded me of the life I once loved. We laughed together, cried together, and celebrated small victories. Their presence became a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in the world, even if the person I had trusted most had abandoned me. Slowly, I started to rebuild my home, my sanctuary. I cleaned, redecorated, and made it a space that reflected who I was becoming: strong, independent, and unshakable. Every little change was symbolic, a way of reclaiming control over my life, over my environment, and over the narrative of my own story. And then came the unexpected opportunities. I was offered a promotion at work, a chance to lead a team and make decisions that mattered. I took it, embracing the challenge with a determination fueled not by ambition alone, but by the desire to prove to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet. Every day, I grew more confident, more capable, more aware of my own worth. It was during this period of growth that I began to see him differently, not as the man that I had loved blindly, but as a person who had failed me at a moment when his presence mattered most. The anger was still there, yes, simmering beneath the surface, but it no longer controlled me. I was learning that empowerment often comes from acceptance. The acceptance that you cannot change someone else, only yourself, and that your life does not depend on their choices. I started setting boundaries. I stopped waiting by the phone for his calls. I stopped seeking his approval or validation. Every time I reminded myself that my life was mine to live, that my happiness did not require his presence, I felt a surge of liberation, a sense of freedom I had never known before. I also discovered passions I had long neglected: reading, volunteering, and even taking a few courses in subjects I had always been curious about. These pursuits weren't just distractions. They were affirmations of my independence, proof that I could create joy, purpose, and fulfillment on my own. There were moments of loneliness, of course, nights when the house was too quiet, and memories of what had been flooded my mind like an unrelenting tide. But even in those moments, I clung to the knowledge that I had chosen strength over despair, action over stagnation, and growth over dependence. I had discovered that resilience is born from adversity, and that the human spirit, when tested, can rise far beyond what it ever imagined possible. Friends noticed the change. They commented on my confidence, my radiance, and the sense of purpose that seemed to light up every room I entered. Strangers noticed it too, at the grocery store, at work, even on casual walks around the neighborhood. There was a new energy in me, a quiet power that emanated from the hard-fought victories over pain, betrayal, and abandonment. And through it all, I realized something crucial. Empowerment is not revenge. It is not about proving someone wrong or making them regret their choices. Empowerment is about reclaiming your life, your joy, and your identity from the shadows of neglect and heartbreak. It is about recognizing your worth, trusting your instincts, and refusing to let someone else's failures define your future. By the time months had passed, I was no longer the same person who had waited helplessly in the hospital, pleading for support. I had transformed, reshaped by adversity into someone unbreakable, someone who could face life's storms without fear. And in that transformation, I found peace. It was during a quiet evening, as I sat sipping tea on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and pink, that I realized I had reached a turning point. I was no longer defined by the past, by the man who left, or by the pain he caused. I was defined by my resilience, my courage, and my unwavering commitment to myself. That turning point wasn't just a moment. It was a journey of rediscovery, of self-love, and of empowerment. It was the realization that life's greatest challenges often come not to destroy us, but to awaken the strength we never knew we had. And as I looked out at the horizon, I understood that my story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. A story not of dependence or despair, but of triumph, independence, and unwavering resilience. The months following my turning point were transformative.
Every small victory I achieved became a brick in the foundation of the new life I was building, one where I was no longer defined by his absence or his failures, but by my strength, resilience, and determination. I threw myself into work with a single-minded focus. What had once felt like a burdensome career became a platform for growth. I took on projects that challenged me, sought leadership opportunities, and pushed myself beyond the limits I had previously accepted. Each success, whether big or small, was a reminder I could thrive without anyone else holding me up. Financial independence became more than a goal. It became a symbol of my self-worth. I opened a separate account, tracked my expenses, and started saving for a future that I controlled. No longer would my life depend on someone else's choices, someone else's failures. Every dollar I earned was a testament to my perseverance, a tangible reward for the nights I spent crying, praying, and fighting for my own dignity. But success wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. I began reconnecting with the world in ways I had neglected. Friends who had drifted away were drawn back by the new energy I radiated. I joined community groups, volunteered for causes I cared about, and even pursued hobbies I had once abandoned: painting, hiking, and even joining a book club where I met people who inspired me to think bigger and dream further. The house that had once felt cold and suffocating now became my sanctuary. I redecorated, adding colors and warmth that reflected my personality and independence. Every corner of that space became a reminder of how far I had come, how much I had overcome, and how much I now valued my own presence. Even the small things, a freshly brewed coffee in the morning, a candlelit dinner for one, or a cozy nook for reading, became acts of self-love. With independence came confidence. I walked taller, spoke with authority, and carried myself in a way that demanded respect, not just from others, but from myself. There was a subtle but undeniable shift in the way people noticed me. Colleagues began to consult me for guidance. Strangers complimented my demeanor. Friends noticed the calm, steady strength that replaced the timid, anxious version of myself. And every compliment, every acknowledgement, strengthened my belief in my own abilities. But the most profound change was internal. I had learned to silence the voice that whispered doubt and fear, replacing it with one that spoke of courage, resilience, and self-worth. I no longer sought validation from him or anyone else for that matter. I had discovered that the greatest power comes from within, from trusting yourself to handle whatever life throws your way, and from refusing to let betrayal or disappointment define your story. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the memory of his absence cut like a knife. The nights he didn't come, the silence he left behind, the empty space where his love should have been. But instead of letting these memories consume me, I used them as fuel. Every pang of hurt became a reminder of what I no longer allowed in my life: dependence on someone incapable of being present when it mattered most. Then came the day he reached out. I received a call, unexpected and nerve-wracking. His voice trembled, heavy with regret. I I made a mistake. I shouldn't have left you. I I want to make things right. I listened in silence. Part of me felt a surge of old emotions: hurt, longing, confusion. But the stronger, louder part of me reminded me of everything I had built, every tear I had shed, every battle I had fought for my own dignity. I realized that while he had abandoned me when I needed him most, I had discovered my own power, my own independence, and my own worth. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a moment to breathe, to ground myself in the reality of my life now. I was no longer the woman waiting for him to save me. I had become my own savior, my own protector, my own anchor in the storm. And in that moment, I knew that no apology, no plea, and no regret could erase the strength I had forged in the fire of his absence. Financial success, personal growth, and emotional resilience combined to create a life that was unshakable. I could travel, explore new opportunities, and make choices without fear of judgment or dependence. I met new people, built meaningful relationships, and redefined what happiness meant for me. No longer was it tied to anyone else's presence. It was mine to claim, shape, and protect. And through it all, I noticed a subtle shift in how he perceived me. From the silence of regret on his side, I could sense that he realized what he had lost. Perhaps he understood that the woman he had abandoned was no longer the same. She was stronger, more confident, and unafraid. She was thriving without him, and that realization, I suspect, cut deeper than any words could express. By the time a year had passed, I had completely transformed my life. My home, my career, my friendships, and most importantly, my self-respect had all become testaments to the journey I had endured. I no longer measured my worth by his presence, nor did I allow the shadow of his choices to linger over my accomplishments. Every achievement, every smile, every moment of peace was mine, hard-earned and unapologetic. The crisis that had once threatened to destroy me had instead become the catalyst for my greatest growth. The abandonment that once felt like a cruel betrayal had become a lesson in resilience, empowerment, and self-reliance. I had learned that sometimes losing someone is the universe's way of showing you how strong you really are and how capable you are of creating a life that doesn't rely on anyone else's love or approval. And as I stood in front of the mirror one evening, looking at the reflection of a woman I barely recognized, confident, independent, radiant, I realized something profound. Success isn't just about money, status, or recognition. Success is about reclaiming your life, your power, and your joy, even in the face of heartbreak. It's about standing tall when the world expects you to crumble. And it's about understanding that the greatest victory is not in someone else's regret, but in your own triumph over pain. It happened on a rainy evening, the kind of rain that washes the streets clean, but never quite cleans the heart. I was sitting in my newly decorated living room, a cup of tea warming my hands, the soft hum of music filling the space I had carefully built for myself. That's when my phone buzzed. His name appeared on the screen, a name that had once brought me comfort but now only reminded me of heartbreak. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the call go unanswered, because I had learned that sometimes silence is more powerful than confrontation. But curiosity, and perhaps the lingering fragments of old love, pushed me to swipe. "Hello?" I said, my voice calm but firm. There was a pause on the other end, and then his voice, trembling and heavy with guilt, filled the line. I need to talk to you. I know I've made mistakes, and I regret leaving you. I never should have walked away when you needed me the most." For a moment, I was silent, letting the words sink in. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside me. Memories of pain, loneliness, and betrayal clashing with the undeniable truth that I had grown stronger without him. I could feel my heart racing. Part of me wanted to rush into forgiveness, another part screaming at me to protect myself. "I hear you," I said, finally, my voice calm but firm. "Do you understand how much it hurt to be abandoned? How it felt to face the worst moment of my life alone?" There was a long pause, and then he spoke, voice breaking. I know. I can't even begin to describe how sorry I am. I was scared, lost and I didn't handle things the way I should have. I see that now. I see what I've lost, and I want to make things right. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Every fiber of my being wanted to shout, cry, and demand an apology that could erase the months of neglect. But I had changed. I was no longer the woman who waited for someone else to fix her life. I was a woman who had fought through pain, built a future, and discovered her own strength. And I would not allow the storm of his regret to dictate my next move. "Do you know why I survived that night?" I asked softly, my eyes glistening but unwavering. "Do you know why I didn't let your absence break me completely?" He was silent, probably realizing that the answer wasn't going to be comforting. "Because I chose myself. I chose my life, my happiness, and my strength over waiting for someone who wasn't there when it mattered most. And now that I've built this life, I see clearly that it doesn't depend on you or anyone else for that matter." His silence was telling. For the first time, I sensed the depth of his regret, the realization that he had not only abandoned me but had underestimated my resilience. I had survived, thrived, and transformed, and he had missed it all. "I just want a chance to make things right," he pleaded. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. "Chances were given before, and you walked away." I've learned something important. Love is not about excuses or promises. It's about being there when it counts. And you weren't. I am not the same woman who waited for you in silence. I am stronger, independent, and whole without you. The line was quiet for a long moment, filled only with the sound of rain tapping against the window and the distant hum of the city. I felt no fear, no desperation, just a calm, unshakable clarity. I had come too far, fought too hard, and loved myself too much to let regret dictate my life. "Can we at least talk in person?" he asked finally, a hint of desperation in his voice. I smiled faintly, a smile that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with power and self-respect. "No, not now. Maybe never. What's done is done. I hope you find your peace. But my peace, my life, is mine alone now." I hung up, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The confrontation had been necessary, not to hear his apology, but to affirm my own strength, my own independence, and my own worth. I realized that confrontation isn't always about changing the other person. It's about asserting yourself, reclaiming your life, and drawing boundaries that protect your heart. That night, I stepped out onto my balcony, letting the rain wash over me. Each drop felt like a cleansing, a release of the pain, anger, and disappointment I had carried for months. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the destructive way that consumes your energy and your soul. I was calm, centered, and proud of the woman I had become. He had come back into my life, and yet he no longer had power over me. His regrets, his pleas, his attempts to make amends, they were shadows against the bright, strong reality I had created. I had survived the worst, and in doing so, I had discovered that my life, my happiness, and my worth were never in anyone else's hands. For the first time in a long while, I felt entirely free. Free from fear, free from dependency, free from the ghosts of a love that had once abandoned me. And as I watched the city lights twinkle below, I knew that no storm, no crisis, and no regret could ever shake the foundation I had built for myself. Confrontation had revealed the truth, that he had missed his chance, and I had found mine. The chance to reclaim my life, my peace, and my power. And in that moment, I finally understood the full meaning of independence, strength, and self-love. Time has a strange way of healing wounds while also revealing truths. Months had passed since the confrontation, since I had firmly drawn the line between the life I had reclaimed and the one that had almost broken me. And in that time, something extraordinary happened. I found peace, real, unshakable peace. The woman who had once waited, cried, and feared being alone was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, more confident, and fiercely independent. I woke up every morning with a sense of purpose, with joy in my heart, and a vision for a future that was mine to shape. I no longer measured my worth by anyone else's presence or absence. I measured it by the courage, resilience, and integrity I brought into every moment of my life. I continued to thrive professionally, taking on challenges I had once thought impossible. I traveled, explored new opportunities, and connected with people who inspired growth and positivity. But more importantly, I cultivated a deep, abiding relationship with myself, one built on self-love, acceptance, and empowerment. I learned to celebrate my victories, comfort myself in moments of doubt, and cherish the freedom I had fought so hard to earn. Occasionally, I would hear whispers from the past, friends mentioning his name, seeing a social media post, or even catching glimpses of him in public spaces. Each time, I felt a mix of emotions, a flicker of sadness, a shadow of nostalgia, but no desperation, no dependence. Those moments reminded me that the past exists only to teach lessons and shape strength, not to define the present. One evening, I found myself reflecting on the journey. The nights spent in tears, the days of solitude, the moments of despair that had seemed endless. I realized that each challenge, each heartbreak, and each moment of betrayal had been necessary. They had pushed me to confront my fears, to uncover my resilience, and to reclaim a life that I might never have discovered if everything had gone smoothly. And then, unexpectedly, he reached out one final time. This time there was no pleading, no desperation, only acknowledgement of the past and a quiet admission of regret. He wrote, "I see what I lost, and I understand now. I wish I could have been the partner you deserved, but I wasn't. I hope you are happy, truly." I paused, reading the message carefully. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, tempted to respond, but I didn't. I realized that closure doesn't always come from confrontation or forgiveness. Sometimes closure comes from letting go, from accepting the reality, and from continuing to live fully in your own power. Instead, I smiled, a deep, genuine smile that radiated peace, strength, and liberation. I didn't need his validation, his apology, or his presence. My happiness was no longer contingent on him or anyone else. I had created a life I loved, a life I had fought for, and a life that reflected my worth, resilience, and unbreakable spirit. That night, I stepped onto my balcony, breathing in the cool, crisp air. The city light stretched before me like a tapestry of possibilities, each one a reminder that life is vast, beautiful, and full of opportunities for those who refuse to be broken. I felt gratitude, not for what I had lost, but for what I had gained: clarity, strength, and an unshakable belief in myself. I thought back to the woman I had been, the one who waited, cried, and feared being alone. I honored her, because without her, I would not have discovered the power, resilience, and courage that now define me. But I also knew that she belonged to the past. I belonged to the present, a present filled with freedom, self-love, and the knowledge that I am enough just as I am. And as I closed my eyes that night, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. Never again would I let someone else's choices determine my happiness. Never again would I sacrifice my peace for someone who refuses to show up. I had learned the hard way, but I had learned well. Life moves forward, and I move with it, stronger, wiser, and unafraid. The scars remain, yes, but they are reminders of survival, strength, and transformation. I no longer dwell on the regret of others. I focus on my triumphs, my growth, and the endless possibilities that lie ahead. The story of heartbreak, abandonment, and betrayal had reached its conclusion. But the story of resilience, empowerment, and self-discovery continues, unfolding every day in a life that is mine alone to live. And in that life, I have found something priceless, the unshakable truth that no one can take away what I have fought so hard to reclaim, the love, respect, and freedom I hold for myself. I am whole, I am free, and I am unstoppable.